17-year-old Jalen Carter had only one mission that Saturday afternoon: to find the perfect birthday gift for his little sister, Aaliyah. Living in the quiet, suburban town of Riverton, Jalen had grown up watching her face light up over the smallest acts of kindness. This year he wanted to give her something unforgettable, something that showed just how much he loved her. For months, Jalen had been working part-time at Parker's coffee house, saving every tip, every dollar with careful determination. His goal wasn't just to buy a piece of jewelry, it was to create a memory. He had walked past Belmont Jewelers countless times, eyes fixed on the silver charm bracelet in the display window. In his imagination, he could already see Aaliyah's delighted expression when she opened the box. Now, with his wallet full and his heart set, today was the day. As he approached the gleaming storefront, Jalen felt both excitement and nerves. He adjusted his hoodie, conscious of how others might perceive him, but reminded himself that he had every right to be there. He wasn't just a teenage boy in a hoodie, he was a loving brother on a mission. The bracelet wasn't about luxury or showing off, it was a symbol of love, sacrifice, and effort. Every dollar he saved represented early mornings, long shifts, and the pride of earning something for someone he cherished. Entering the store, Jalen was filled with hope and anticipation. He had done everything right. He had worked hard, saved up, and planned this moment with care. But as the door chime rang and he stepped into the elegant space of Belmont Jewelers, he had no idea that the simple act of buying a bracelet would soon spiral into a moment of injustice, prejudice, and a battle for his dignity. As Jalen Carter stepped into Belmont Jewelers, the excitement that had built up inside him over weeks of anticipation quickly began to unravel. The store, with its polished glass cases and luxury ambiance, should have been the final stop in a heartfelt journey, a teenager buying a gift for his sister. Instead, it became the setting for an all-too-familiar experience of racial profiling. From the moment Jalen entered, Margaret Whitmore, the middle-aged store clerk, regarded him with suspicion. Her expression shifted from neutral professionalism to thinly veiled distrust the second her eyes landed on him. Despite Jalen's polite demeanor, clean appearance, and clear intent to make a purchase, Margaret saw only a stereotype, a young black male in a hoodie, assumed to be trouble before he even said a word. When Jalen asked to see the bracelet he had saved up for, Margaret questioned whether he could afford it, mocking the amount of cash he presented with an air of condescension. The situation escalated when the bracelet accidentally slipped from his hands and fell to the floor. Rather than treat the incident as a harmless mistake, Margaret reacted with theatrical alarm, immediately accusing him of attempting to steal. Her voice rang out through the store, drawing attention and judgment from nearby customers. Without hesitation, she called the police, reporting a theft in progress and branding Jalen as a criminal. Her language, young black male in a hoodie, wasn't just a description, it was a loaded accusation shaped by bias. As Jalen stood frozen, knowing that any movement or protest could be used against him, the fear that had been ingrained in him by years of cautionary talks from his mother became a reality. He wasn't treated as a customer. He wasn't even treated as a teenager. He was immediately seen as a threat, guilty until proven innocent. What should have been a joyful moment turned into a nightmare fueled by prejudice. Margaret's false accusation, layered with racism and arrogance, not only endangered Jalen's safety, but attempted to rob him of his dignity, his purpose, and the simple right to exist in a space meant for all customers. Her assumptions were not rooted in fact, but in fear, and in doing so she exposed the deep, systemic bias that still thrives beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary encounters. When the police arrived at Belmont Jewelers, the situation escalated from unsettling to dangerous in an instant. Jalen Carter, still reeling from the baseless accusation made by Margaret Whitmore, barely had time to process her words before two uniformed officers entered the store. Instead of approaching the situation with calm investigation or measured inquiry, Sergeant Blake, the older and more dominant of the two, immediately moved toward Jalen with his hand on his cuffs, demanding that he put his hands where they could see them. There were no questions asked, no request for Jalen's side of the story, no examination of the facts. The only thing Blake saw was what Margaret had described, a young black male who must be guilty simply because someone said so, Jalen knew instinctively that any wrong move, any resistance, even speaking too loudly, could turn the moment deadly. He stood frozen, trying to control his breath, reminding himself of the warnings his mother had given him growing up. Meanwhile, Officer Doyle, the younger officer, hesitated. He seemed unsure, his eyes flickering between Jalen, Margaret, and the bracelet on the floor. That flicker of doubt was the only indication that someone in the room might be willing to consider the possibility that Jalen was innocent. Yet, it wasn't enough to stop the wave of injustice already in motion. The terrifying truth settled in for Jalen. His words meant nothing in this moment. Margaret's version of events, supported by her skin color and societal position, was being taken as fact, while his truth, his fear, his dignity were invisible. It was a chilling reminder of how easily power and prejudice could combine to endanger lives, and how quickly law enforcement, without question or evidence, could act as judge, jury, and executioner in the eyes of a biased witness. Just when it seemed that the situation had reached a point of no return, Jalen made a calm but determined request that would change everything. "Call my mother." His voice, though steady, carried the weight of desperation and a quiet resolve. The officers barely took him seriously, until moments later the door of Belmont Jewelers swung open, and in walked a commanding woman in a navy blue suit. Dr. Simone Carter, Chief of Police for Riverton, announced her presence, with authority that silenced the room. The badge she held wasn't just symbolic, it shifted the entire balance of power in the room. When she declared that Jalen was her son, the smug confidence drained from Margaret's face, and the certainty of Sergeant Blake wavered. Simone didn't need to raise her voice. Her calm, focused demeanor exposed the absurdity and injustice of what had transpired. She questioned the officers' actions, pointing out that they had moved to arrest her son without so much as reviewing the store's security footage or listening to his side of the story. Her presence transformed the narrative. No longer was Jalen just a suspect in the eyes of power. He was the son of the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the city. Simone demanded accountability, not just for her son, but for the system that allowed this to happen so easily. Her words pierced through the room like a blade, highlighting the racial bias and failure of due process. In that moment, the story took an unexpected turn. Jalen was no longer alone. He was seen, believed, and defended by someone with the authority to make the truth matter. And while justice had not yet been fully served, the tide had turned. Simone's entrance wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. The aftermath of Dr. Simone Carter's arrival marked a pivotal shift in the story, transforming what could have been another silent act of injustice into a call for accountability. Once the store's security footage was reviewed, the truth was undeniable. Jalen had not attempted to steal anything. The video clearly showed him politely asking to see the bracelet, presenting his hard-earned money, and accidentally dropping the item. No crime, no deception, just a young man trying to buy a gift. Sergeant Blake, who had rushed to judgment without investigating, now stood exposed. Margaret Whitmore's certainty, once backed by prejudice and a false sense of authority, crumbled before the evidence. Simone didn't stop at clearing her son's name. With unwavering resolve, she demanded further action. She initiated an internal investigation into Blake's conduct and called for a public statement addressing the racial profiling that had occurred. She insisted Margaret's name be included in the official report, ensuring her actions wouldn't be swept under the rug. Margaret, once so vocal and self-righteous, now stood speechless, her power undone by truth and exposure. The store's reputation, once bolstered by luxury and exclusivity, was now marred by scandal. Customers who had silently watched the incident unfold now found themselves complicit, their judgment and inaction spotlighted by the unfolding truth. Margaret's failure to apologize only deepened the stain of her actions. Blake, though clearly uncomfortable, offered no real acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But justice had begun. Through Simone's determination, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't just about one boy, it was about a system, a culture, and the demand for change. Margaret and the officers were no longer shielded by assumption or position. They were being held to account, and for the first time in that store, power was being wielded in the name of justice. In the days following the incident at Belmont Jewelers, the story spread rapidly online, in news broadcasts, and across social media platforms. Outrage echoed from all corners, and the public response was swift. The jewelry store's once pristine reputation began to unravel. Thousands of users flooded the store's Yelp and Google reviews with one-star ratings, condemning their treatment of Jalen Carter. Under mounting pressure, Belmont Jewelers placed Margaret Whitmore on indefinite leave, though inside sources suggested she had in fact been quietly terminated. The store released a carefully worded public statement denouncing racial profiling, but the damage had been done. Meanwhile, the Riverton Police Department launched an internal investigation into Sergeant Blake's conduct after body cam footage confirmed he had moved to detain Jalen without proper questioning or evidence. His credibility and judgment were now under scrutiny. Most importantly, Dr. Jalen Carter didn't let the matter fade into the background. She used her position as chief of police to push for structural accountability, calling out not only the individual actions, but the underlying systemic issues that allowed such injustice to unfold so easily. Her press release was both powerful and personal, condemning the misuse of emergency services and highlighting the real consequences of racial bias. How quickly a young black boy can be seen as a criminal without cause. Though Jalen was never charged, the emotional toll remained. Still, justice, while imperfect, had been served. For once, a story like his didn't end in silence or tragedy. The world had watched. Margaret had been exposed. The police were being held accountable. And most importantly, a message had been sent. Profiling and prejudice would not go unchecked. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a meaningful one. Proof that with truth, courage, and the right support, power could be challenged and justice could be demanded. Even after justice was technically served, Jalen Carter couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. In the quiet that followed the chaos, there was no sense of triumph, only exhaustion. He had stood tall, endured public humiliation, and been vindicated in the eyes of the world, yet none of it erased the trauma. The accusation, the fear, the disbelief in every pair of eyes around him, all of it still lingered. Margaret Whitmore never apologized. She walked away from the confrontation stripped of her power but clinging to the same pride that had fueled her bias in the first place. And while Sergeant Blake and Officer Doyle faced internal investigations, Jalen knew that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it wouldn't be the last. What haunted him most was the realization that had his mother not been the chief of police, the outcome could have been drastically different. Without her authority, would anyone have believed him? Would the cameras have even mattered? Back home, Jalen watched as his younger sister Aaliyah squealed with joy over the charm bracelet he had longed to give her. His mother had returned to the store later to buy it, making sure Aaliyah's birthday wasn't overshadowed by injustice. Watching her beam with happiness was the only bright spot in an otherwise bitter experience. Jalen smiled, but it was a tired smile, one that masked the ache of understanding too much, too young. He confided in Simone that even after all was said and done, he still felt angry and helpless. His mother, seasoned by years of fighting the same battles, offered him the only comfort she could. "You didn't let them define you." Her words reminded him that real justice isn't just about punishment or public outcry. It's about reclaiming dignity, refusing to be erased, and making the world look at you differently, even when it doesn't want to. Jalen didn't walk away with only a bracelet or a headline. He walked away with a painful truth and a deeper strength. The story wasn't just about a boy falsely accused, it was about a system revealed, a voice raised, and a resolve formed in the fire of adversity. And while he knew the fight wasn't over, he also knew this time he hadn't fought it alone. Even after justice was technically served, Jalen Carter couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. In the quiet that followed the chaos, there was no sense of triumph, only exhaustion. He had stood tall, endured public humiliation, and been vindicated in the eyes of the world, yet none of it erased the trauma. The accusation, the fear, the disbelief in every pair of eyes around him, all of it still lingered. Margaret Whitmore never apologized. She walked away from the confrontation stripped of her power but clinging to the same pride that had fueled her bias in the first place. And while Sergeant Blake and Officer Doyle faced internal investigations, Jalen knew that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it wouldn't be the last. What haunted him most was the realization that had his mother not been the chief of police, the outcome could have been drastically different. Without her authority, would anyone have believed him? Would the cameras have even mattered? Back home, Jalen watched as his younger sister Aaliyah squealed with joy over the charm bracelet he had longed to give her. His mother had returned to the store later to buy it, making sure Aaliyah's birthday wasn't overshadowed by injustice. Watching her beam with happiness was the only bright spot in an otherwise bitter experience. Jalen smiled, but it was a tired smile, one that masked the ache of understanding too much, too young. He confided in Simone that even after all was said and done, he still felt angry and helpless. His mother, seasoned by years of fighting the same battles, offered him the only comfort she could. "You didn't let them define you." Her words reminded him that real justice isn't just about punishment or public outcry. It's about reclaiming dignity, refusing to be erased, and making the world look at you differently, even when it doesn't want to. Jalen didn't walk away with only a bracelet or a headline. He walked away with a painful truth and a deeper strength. The story wasn't just about a boy falsely accused. It was about a system revealed, a voice raised, and a resolve formed in the fire of adversity. And while he knew the fight wasn't over, he also knew this time he hadn't fought it alone.